The morning Professor Nia Reeves first heard their language, she was grading papers in her cramped office at Georgetown University, surrounded by towers of linguistic journals and half-empty coffee cups. The alien transmission came through every device simultaneously: phones, computers, radios, a cascade of melodic tones that made her heart race with professional excitement rather than fear. While the world panicked about the massive ships hovering over major cities, Nia grabbed her recording equipment and began transcribing the patterns. She had spent 15 years studying dead languages, but this was something entirely different. The sounds weren't random, they followed mathematical sequences that reminded her of both Sanskrit phonemes and whale songs. The ships themselves defied every expectation of alien invasion vessels. Rather than the angular, threatening designs of science fiction, these craft resembled enormous crystalline flowers, their translucent petals catching and refracting sunlight into prismatic rainbows that danced across the sky. They moved with organic grace, pulsing gently as if breathing, their surfaces rippling with patterns of bioluminescent light. 3 days into what the media insisted on calling an occupation, while military forces proved helpless against technology that seemed more grown than manufactured, Nia made her breakthrough. Hidden in her university's basement linguistics lab, she discovered the aliens weren't issuing demands or threats, they were asking questions. The transmission she decoded sent chills down her spine. Where are the singers? Where are those who remember the old harmonies? We have traveled so far to find you. Her hands shook as she replayed the recording. The emotional undertones in the alien language were unmistakable, not aggression or superiority, but desperate longing. These beings weren't conquerors, they were searchers. The aliens called themselves the Etheri, and their language was unlike anything in human experience. It wasn't just spoken, it was felt, each word carrying emotional resonance that bypassed logic and spoke directly to the heart. When Nia finally managed to construct a response using modified audio equipment and her own intuitive understanding of the tonal patterns, the effect was immediate. The Etheri ships stopped their ominous circling and descended toward her location. With unmistakable urgency, Nia's supervisor, Professor Mitchell, found her in the lab as the building began to shake from the ship's approach. "Nia, we need to evacuate. The military is setting up a perimeter." "No," she said firmly, adjusting her equipment one final time. "They're not here to hurt us. They're here because I called to them." The crystalline vessel settled onto the university's quad with impossible gentleness, its landing causing flowers to bloom spontaneously in the surrounding grass. Students and faculty watched from safe distances as the ship's surface began to shift and flow, creating an opening like an iris dilating. When the beings emerged, Nia forgot to breathe. They were tall and graceful, with skin that shimmered like auroral light and eyes that seemed to hold the depth of ancient oceans. But it wasn't their otherworldly beauty that captivated her, it was their emotional transparency. She could feel their relief, their desperate hope, their profound loneliness washing over her in waves. The leader approached her with reverence that made no sense for a supposed invasion force. His movements were fluid, musical, and when he spoke, his words created visible ripples in the air between them, colors bleeding from sound itself. "You speak the deep language," he said, and Nia realized she could understand him perfectly now, not just through translation, but through some deeper connection that had formed the moment. She'd successfully responded to their call, we thought. All the singers had died with our world. His name translated roughly to resonance, keeper of fading light. Though Nia found herself thinking of him simply as Ren, something about his presence felt familiar, as if she'd been waiting her entire life to meet him without knowing it. Through painstaking communication over the following hours, Nia learned the truth that would change everything. The Etheri weren't invaders, they were refugees. Their home planet had been consumed by a cosmic phenomenon they could only describe as the silence that devours harmony. They had fled across the galaxy, following ancient star maps that promised them sanctuary with other resonant species. The beings they sought weren't subjects to conquer, but potential partners in a form of interstellar communion that transcended physical existence. The Etheri's technology wasn't designed for war, but for harmony, literally powered by synchronized emotional resonance between compatible species. But there was a heartbreaking catch. The Etheri were dying. Their exile had lasted too long, and without the deep connection they needed with another resonant species, their life force was slowly fading. They had perhaps months left before their entire civilization would simply cease to exist. "We came seeking a place to die with dignity among the stars," Ren explained, his luminous form seeming to dim even as they spoke. "Instead, we found you. The question now is whether your species can learn our song before we fade entirely." As Ren spoke, Naya felt something unprecedented happening in her chest, a warm resonance that seemed to bridge to worlds and to hearts. His despair was becoming her despair, but more importantly, her hope was becoming his hope. The connection was intoxicating and terrifying in its intensity. "What happens if we can learn?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer would change not just humanity's future, but her own. Ren's expression shifted, colors playing across his features like emotions made visible. "Then both our species evolve beyond what either could achieve alone. We become something new together, a harmony that could heal worlds and birth new forms of life among the stars." But as he reached toward her, his fingers stopping just short of touching hers, Naya saw the real truth in his ancient eyes. This wasn't just about species survival. Something was growing between them, something that defied every law of biology and physics, but felt more real than anything she'd ever experienced. The invasion had become something else entirely, a love story between worlds, and possibly between two souls who had found each other across the vast loneliness of space. Everything now depended on whether humanity could learn to sing in harmony before the universe's most beautiful music fell silent forever. Marcus Chenokafer had always believed that energy was the key to everything, to progress, to peace, to survival itself. Standing in his laboratory at MIT 3 weeks after first contact, watching the Etheri energy readings on his modified spectrometer, he realized he had been more right than he could have imagined. The data was impossible according to everything he knew about physics. The crystalline ships hovering over Earth's cities were generating clean, unlimited energy using principles that seemed to violate the laws of thermodynamics. But Marcus had spent his career pushing boundaries, developing fusion reactors and solar collection systems that others said were decades ahead of their time. If anyone could understand alien technology, it was him. What he hadn't expected was to fall in love while doing it. "The resonance patterns are definitely organic," he murmured, adjusting his instruments for the 100th time that day. The Etheri had agreed to let selected human scientists study their technology, and Marcus had been chosen for his work in sustainable energy systems. "More organic than you might think," came a melodious voice behind him. Marcus turned to find one of the Etheri standing in his laboratory doorway. She was smaller than the others he'd seen, with skin that shifted between deep amber and gold, like honey held up to sunlight. Unlike the flowing robes worn by most of her people, she had adapted to human fashion, wearing a simple dress that somehow seemed to be woven from starlight itself. "I'm Lyrale," she said, and Marcus felt the name resonate in his chest like a struck tuning fork. "I'm what you might call an energy cultivator. I help grow the systems that power our ships." "Grow?" Marcus repeated, his scientific mind immediately intrigued. "You mean they're biological?" Lyrale moved closer to his equipment, her presence causing his instruments to hum with new harmonics. "Not biological as you understand it. Alive in a different way. Our technology exists at the intersection of consciousness and matter. We don't build machines, we cultivate relationships." As she spoke, Marcus found himself studying the way light seemed to emanate from within her skin, the graceful movements of her hands as she gestured. There was something hypnotic about her presence that had nothing to do with alien abilities, and everything to do with a connection he felt forming between them. "Show me," he said quietly. Lyrale smiled, the first truly human expression he'd seen from any of the Etheri, and placed her hand on his spectrometer. Immediately, the device began displaying readings that made Marcus's pulse race. Energy was flowing not from some external source, but from the interaction between Lyrale's consciousness and the machine itself. "Your planet is dying from energy hunger," she said, her voice carrying undertones of deep sadness, burning carbon, splitting atoms, covering your lands with mechanical collectors. But energy isn't something you take, it's something you cultivate through harmony. Marcus watched in amazement as she guided his hands to the spectrometer controls. The moment their skin touched, he felt electricity that had nothing to do with his equipment. The readings showed energy levels increasing exponentially, but more importantly, he could feel something awakening in his own consciousness and awareness of the flows of power that surrounded them constantly. "I don't understand how this is possible," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was talking about the energy readings or the warmth spreading through his chest at her proximity. "Understanding comes through connection, not analysis," Lyrale replied. "Your species thinks in terms of extraction and consumption. Ours thinks in terms of cultivation and relationship. The energy isn't in the machine, it's in the bond between consciousness and possibility." Over the following days, Marcus found himself spending every waking moment with Lyrale, learning principles of energy cultivation that revolutionized his understanding of physics. But more than that, he found himself drawn to her in ways that transcended scientific collaboration. Her laugh reminded him of wind chimes in a summer breeze. Her touch made his skin tingle with possibilities he'd never imagined. The breakthrough came when Lyrale suggested they attempt to cultivate energy together, using one of Earth's existing power grids. Marcus had been skeptical human technology was crude compared to Ethri systems. But as they stood hand in hand in his laboratory, something miraculous happened. The fusion reactor he'd been developing for years suddenly came online with power outputs that exceeded his wildest projections. But it wasn't just the technical achievement that took his breath away, it was the realization that the energy was coming from the connection between them, from the harmony of their combined consciousness focusing on a shared goal. "This could change everything," Marcus said, staring at the readings in amazement. "Clean, unlimited energy. An end to climate change. No more resource wars. But only if your species can learn to work in harmony," Lyrale cautioned. "This technology requires cooperation, emotional resonance, genuine care for the outcome. It cannot be forced or stolen." As they worked together over the following weeks, Marcus began to understand what she meant. The energy cultivation required not just technical knowledge but emotional investment. It worked when he and Lyrale were in sync, when they shared not just goals but genuine affection for each other and for the work they were doing. The personal implications were becoming impossible to ignore. Marcus found himself looking forward to their daily sessions not just for the scientific breakthroughs, but for the moments when Lyrale would laugh at his jokes, or when she would touch his shoulder while explaining a concept, or when she would look at him with an expression that seemed to see directly into his soul. "Marcus," she said one evening as they watched the sunset from his laboratory window, "there's something you need to know about energy cultivation." "What's that?" Lyrale turned to face him, her golden skin shimmering with emotion. "It works best between beings who share deep connection, what humans might call love. The Ethri have been searching the galaxy not just for compatible species, but for the possibility of connections that transcend the boundaries between worlds." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying that what's growing between us might be the key to saving both our species," she said softly. "But only if we're brave enough to let it develop into something neither of our peoples has ever experienced before." As Marcus looked into her luminous eyes, he realized that the greatest energy source in the universe might not be fusion or antimatter or quantum fields. It might be the power generated when two hearts find perfect resonance across the vast distances between stars. Zara Nakamura had always seen the world differently through her digital canvases, but she never expected her art to become the bridge between two civilizations. Standing in her converted warehouse studio in Brooklyn, surrounded by holographic displays showing Ethri symbol patterns, she felt like she was on the verge of translating not just language, but the very essence of an alien soul. The symbols had appeared everywhere since the Ethri arrival, flowing across their ship hulls, dancing in the air during their communications, even seeming to emerge spontaneously in places where humans and Ethri had interacted closely. Traditional linguists like Naya had made progress with spoken communication, But these visual patterns remained a mystery that seemed to shift and change whenever anyone tried to analyze them systematically. "They're not static," Zara murmured to herself, manipulating a three-dimensional projection of one particularly complex symbol. "They're alive. More alive than you know," came a voice like crystalline music from behind her. Zara spun around to find an Ethery standing in her studio doorway. He was different from the others she'd seen, where most of the aliens carried themselves with serene dignity. This one radiated an energy that felt familiar, almost artistic. His skin shifted through deep purples and blues like a living aurora, and his eyes held the same restless creativity she recognized in her own reflection. "I'm Valeth," he said, moving gracefully between her art installations. "I'm what your people might call a memory keeper. I preserve our history through living symbols." "Living symbols?" Zara watched in amazement as Valeth approached one of her holographic displays. The Ethery symbols began to respond to his presence, flowing and reshaping themselves in patterns that made her artist's eye sing with recognition. "Each symbol carries not just meaning, but emotion, memory, experience," Valeth explained. "They change based on who observes them and what needs to be communicated. Your art, it touches the same creative space." As he spoke, Valeth gestured toward her latest digital painting, an abstract piece she'd been working on since the Ethery arrived. To her amazement, the colors began to shift, responding to his presence in ways that should have been impossible with her technology. "How are you doing that?" she whispered, stepping closer to him. She could feel something electric in the air between them, a creative resonance that made her fingertips tingle with possibility. "I'm not doing anything," Valeth replied, his luminous features showing surprise. "You are. Your art is already speaking our visual language. You just don't realize it yet." Over the following days, Zara found herself spending every moment with Valeth, learning to see the Ethery symbols not as static images, but as living expressions of consciousness. Under his guidance, her digital art began to evolve, incorporating elements that seemed to breathe and pulse with their own life. But more than the artistic collaboration, Zara found herself drawn to Valeth in ways that transcended their different species. His passion for preserving beauty and meaning reminded her of her own drive to capture emotion in visual form. When he laughed at her jokes, colors rippled across his skin in patterns that were more beautiful than any sunset. When he concentrated on her work, his intensity made her pulse quicken. "Your species creates art to express what cannot be spoken," Valeth observed one evening as they worked together on a new piece, a fusion of human digital techniques and Ethery living symbols. "We create art to preserve what must not be forgotten." "What are you trying not to forget?" Zara asked, noticing a melancholy shift in his coloration. Valeth's expression grew distant. "Everything. Our home world, our lost loved ones, the songs that died when our planet fell silent. We carry our entire history in these symbols because they're all we have left of who we used to be." As he spoke, the symbols around them began to shift, showing images that took Zara's breath away. Vast crystal cities under alien skies, Ethery communities living in perfect harmony with their environment, moments of joy and beauty from a civilization that no longer existed except in memory. "It's incredible," Zara breathed, "but also heartbreaking. You're carrying the weight of an entire world's history." "We were," Valeth corrected gently. "But since coming to Earth, since meeting humans like you, the symbols have begun to change. They're starting to show not just what we've lost, but what we might gain." He gestured to their collaborative artwork, and Zara saw that the patterns were indeed different now, still carrying echoes of Ethery history, but also incorporating elements that were unmistakably human. Her own creative vision was becoming part of their living memory. "Zara," Valeth said softly, his skin shifting to warm golds that made her heart skip. "There's something the memory keepers have discovered. The symbols respond strongest to emotional connections between individuals. The deeper the bond, the more vivid and lasting the memories they can preserve." What are you saying?" she asked, though her racing pulse suggested she already knew. Valeth moved closer, his presence making the air shimmer with possibility. "I'm saying that what's growing between us is creating new forms of art that neither of our species has ever achieved. Our connection is literally generating new ways to preserve and share beauty across the universe. As their hands touched, the entire studio filled with flowing patterns of light and color symbols that told the story, not just of two civilizations meeting, but of two hearts finding each other across impossible differences. The art they created together wasn't just visual, it was emotional, experiential, alive in ways that transcended traditional media. The other Ethri are amazed. Valeth whispered as colors danced around them like living paintings. Our symbols have never shown such vibrancy, such hope for the future. Your creative spirit is helping us remember not just what we've lost, but what we can build together. Zara realized that her art had always been about connection, helping people see beauty they might otherwise miss, expressing emotions too complex for words. Now she was doing the same thing on an interspecies scale, using her creativity to help two civilizations understand each other in ways that transcended language or logic. The invasion that had begun with fear was becoming something beautiful, a fusion of artistic visions that proved love and creativity could bloom anywhere, even in the space between stars. Elena Vasquez had negotiated peace between warring nations, mediated corporate mergers worth billions, and once talked a terrorist out of detonating a bomb in downtown Geneva. But nothing in her 20-year career had prepared her for the sitting across from beings of living light, trying to broker humanity's future while her own heart was being systematically dismantled by eyes that held the wisdom of ages. The emergency session had been called after 3 months of what the media still insisted on calling an invasion. Though anyone paying attention knew the Ethri were proving to be the gentlest occupiers in history. No governments had fallen, no cities burned, no populations enslaved. Instead, human-Ethri partnerships were sprouting across the globe, creating innovations in energy, communication, and art that were transforming both species. But not everyone was celebrating these changes. They're contaminating us, Senator Richardson declared from across the mahogany table in the UN's emergency session room. These relationships, they're changing human nature itself. We're losing our independence, our humanity. Elena kept her expression neutral despite the irony. She'd been chosen to lead these negotiations partly because of her reputation for objectivity, her ability to remain emotionally detached while finding common ground between opposing factions. What the selection committee hadn't known was that she'd already been compromised. His name was Thessarian, though she thought of him as simply Thais. He'd appeared at her apartment 3 weeks ago, not as an official envoy, but as someone seeking understanding. Unlike the other Ethri she'd encountered, Thais carried himself with the careful grace of someone accustomed to walking between worlds, mediating between different ways of thinking. The humans are afraid, he'd told her that first night, standing on her balcony overlooking Manhattan as his skin shifted through deep teals and silvers. But not of us. They're afraid of what they're becoming. Elena had invited him in for coffee, telling herself it was purely professional curiosity. That was before she'd spent hours talking with him about the art of diplomacy, about the loneliness of being the person everyone expected to have answers, about the weight of carrying other people's hopes and fears. That was before she'd realized she was falling in love with an alien. Now, 3 weeks later, she was trying to negotiate a future for both species while Senator Richardson and his faction demanded the Ethri's immediate departure, convinced that the growing human-alien partnerships were somehow weakening humanity's essential nature. Senator, Elena said carefully, the preliminary reports from our scientific teams suggest these partnerships are actually enhancing human capabilities. Dr. Chen Okafor's energy breakthroughs alone could solve our climate crisis within a decade. At what cost? Richardson shot back. These people are becoming dependent on alien contact to function. It's like a drug. What happens when the aliens decide to leave? Elena felt a chill at his words, partly because they echoed her own deepest fears. Her relationship with Thais had awakened parts of herself she'd never known existed, not just romantically, but intellectually and spiritually. When they were together, she could feel her consciousness expanding, her understanding of complex problems becoming clearer and more nuanced. The thought of losing that connection, losing him, was almost unbearable. Perhaps came a voice like distant music. We should ask the Ethri themselves what they intend. Elena's pulse quickened as Thys materialized in the doorway, his form seeming to solidify from shimmering air. Even after weeks of seeing him almost daily, his appearance still took her breath away. Today his skin held the deep blues and golds of twilight, and his presence seemed to calm the tension in the room. Despite several delegates shifting nervously in their seats, "Thank you for joining us," Elena said formally. Though her eyes conveyed much more personal warmth, the human leadership has concerns about the long-term implications of our cooperation. Thys moved to the empty chair across from her with fluid grace. "We understand these concerns. Change is always frightening, especially when it happens quickly." "Then why don't you leave?" Senator Richardson demanded. "If you truly come in peace, why not give us time to adjust to your existence gradually?" Elena watched Thys's expression shift, colors rippling across his features in patterns she'd learned to read as deep sadness mixed with something that looked like hope. "Because we are dying," Thys said simply, "not as individuals, but as a species. The connections we've formed with humans, they're not just beneficial to you. They're keeping us alive." The room fell silent. Elena felt her diplomatic training warring with personal emotion as she realized the full implications of what Thys was revealing. "Explain," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "Our species evolved to exist in harmony with others," Thys continued. "We are not truly complete beings in isolation. The destruction of our homeworld didn't just take away our planet. It severed us from the web of consciousness that gave our lives meaning. Without deep connections to other aware beings, we fade." Elena saw understanding dawn on several faces around the table. "The partnerships aren't changing humans," she said slowly. "They're saving the Ethri." "Both," Thys corrected gently, his gaze finding hers across the table. "The connections work both ways. Humans who bond deeply with us gain access to expanded consciousness, enhanced creativity, deeper understanding of the universe's interconnected nature. We gain the vitality and innovation that keeps us anchored to existence." Senator Richardson leaned forward aggressively. "So you're parasites." The colors on Thys's skin darkened, but his voice remained calm. "We are partners. The benefits flow in both directions. But yes, Senator, we need these connections to survive. The question is whether humanity can accept a future where both species are stronger together than either could be alone." Elena realized this was the moment her entire career had been building toward, not just as a diplomat, but as a human being. The choice wasn't just about policy, it was about the kind of future their species would choose to create. "I have a proposal," she said, her voice carrying the authority that had made her one of the world's most respected negotiators. "A trial period. 6 months of formal partnership agreements between volunteers from both species. Full transparency, continuous monitoring, the right for either party to withdraw at any time." She looked around the table, then directly at Thys. "But only if the Ethri agree to one condition: complete honesty about what these bonds entail, including any risks or permanent changes." Thys's form brightened, hope spreading across his features like sunrise. "Agreed. Though I should warn you, some of the changes may be irreversible. Love, in any form, always transforms those who experience it." As the debate continued around them, Elena caught Thys's eye and saw her own truth reflected there. The negotiation wasn't just about humanity's future anymore. It was about whether she was brave enough to let her own carefully controlled life be transformed by something as dangerous and wonderful as falling in love with someone from another world. River Blackwood had always believed that gardens were acts of faith, planting seeds with the hope that something beautiful would grow. Standing in the converted Central Park greenhouse, 18 months after first contact, surrounded by impossible flora that defied every law of botany she'd ever learned, she realized her faith had been rewarded in ways she could never have imagined. The hybrid garden was her masterpiece, though calling it hers felt inadequate. Every plant, every carefully cultivated ecosystem had been grown in partnership with Calum, the Ethri life shaper, who had become her collaborator, her best friend, and eventually something much more profound. "The morning glories are singing again," Calum observed, his voice carrying the same wonder it had held when they'd first witnessed this phenomenon. 3 months ago, his skin shifted through the soft greens and golds of early sunrise as he moved between the flowering vines that literally hummed with harmonious frequencies. River smiled, adjusting the atmospheric controls that maintained the perfect balance of earth and ethery. Environmental conditions. Dr. Peterson from the university says it's impossible. Plants don't have vocal cords. Dr. Peterson hasn't learned to listen with more than his ears, Calum replied, his forearmed form moving with practiced grace as he tended to a cluster of crystalline flowers that chimed like wind bells in the gentle breeze. These plants sing because they're happy. They've learned joy from being loved by both our species. The garden had become a symbol of the new world that was emerging from what historians were already calling the Great Awakening. The initial fear and resistance had faded as more humans experienced the profound connections possible with ethery partners. Elena's diplomatic framework had been adopted globally, creating structured partnership programs that allowed both species to explore their expanding capabilities safely. But it was places like River's garden that truly showed the world what was possible. Plants that grew in impossible colors, trees that produced fruit with flavors that could only be described as emotional experiences, flowers that responded to human moods with shifting patterns of bioluminescence. The garden wasn't just beautiful, it was alive in ways that transcended traditional biology. River, Calum said softly, his skin taking on the deeper blues that she'd learned indicated serious thoughts. There's something I need to tell you about the Council's latest communication. From our scattered fleets, River looked up from the hybrid orchids she'd been pollinating, noting the concern in his voice. Over the months of their partnership, she'd learned to read his emotional states as easily as she could identify plant diseases. Something was troubling him. What is it? Calum moved closer, his presence causing the nearby plants to lean toward him like flowers following the sun. The other ethery ships have been monitoring our progress here on Earth. What we've accomplished, the partnerships, the hybrid technologies, the new forms of life we're creating together, it's unprecedented in galactic history. That's good news, isn't it? River asked, though something in his expression made her heart skip with apprehension. It is, but it's also attracted attention from others who survived the Great Silence. Species we thought were extinct are emerging from hiding places across the galaxy. They want to learn from what we've built here. River felt a complex mix of excitement and anxiety. How many others? Dozens of species, maybe hundreds, all seeking what we've found, the possibility of connections that transcend individual consciousness, while preserving what makes each species unique. Calum's skin brightened with hope. Earth could become the center of a new kind of civilization. Not an empire based on conquest, but a community based on voluntary partnership and mutual enhancement. As he spoke, River looked around their garden with new eyes. The impossible beauty they'd created together, the singing plants, the emotion-responsive flowers, the trees that bore fruit flavored with memories, all of it was proof that love could literally create new forms of life. What does this mean for us? She asked quietly, the question carrying layers of meaning they both understood. Calum took her hands in his, the familiar warmth of their connection, making the plants around them glow more brightly. It means we're pioneers, River. What we've built together in this garden, in our relationship, in the new understanding we've developed, it's becoming a template for something that could transform the entire galaxy. Over the past months, River had watched their personal connection deepen in ways that challenged everything she thought she knew about love and consciousness. When they worked together in the garden, she could feel his thoughts and emotions as clearly as her own. When he was away, she felt incomplete in ways that had nothing to do with romantic attachment and everything to do with the expansion of her very sense of self. The other humans in the partnership program are reporting similar experiences, she said, thinking of the reports she'd been reading. Naya says her work with Ren has evolved beyond language into direct consciousness sharing. Marcus and Lyrale have created energy systems that respond to their combined emotional states. Zara and Valeth are producing art that preserves living memories. And Elena and Thais have negotiated agreements that are serving as models for interspecies diplomacy across 3-star systems. Calum added, "We're not just individual couples anymore, River. We're proof of concept for a new form of existence." The implications were staggering. River looked around the garden that had become their shared sanctuary, realizing it was also a glimpse of what the entire galaxy might become, a place where different forms of consciousness could merge without losing their essential nature, where love could literally birth new forms of life and beauty. "Are you ready for that responsibility?" she asked, though she was really asking herself. Calum's expression softened, his skin shifting through the warm ambers and golds that she'd learned meant deep contentment. "I've been ready since the day I first saw you talking to that struggling tomato plant like it was a beloved child. You have a gift for nurturing life, River. Not just plants, but possibilities. What we're growing together, it's going to help reshape the universe." As if in response to his words, the entire garden seemed to pulse with gentle light, every hybrid plant glowing in harmony. The morning glories raised their voices in a song that sounded like hope made audible, while the crystalline flowers chimed in counterpoint melodies that spoke of joy and infinite possibility. River realized that the invasion everyone had feared 18 months ago had indeed brought an era to its end, the era of isolation, of species developing in solitude, of love being limited by the boundaries of biology and physics. In its place was dawning something unprecedented, an age where consciousness could transcend individual limitations, where love could create new forms of life, and where the universe itself might bloom into something more beautiful than any single world could imagine alone. The greatest garden in galactic history was just beginning to grow,